My girlfriend broke up with me, moved in with her male best friend, and had no clue about his roommate's secret scheme. Now thing is falling out of control. Hey Reddit. I don't even know where to start with this. My girlfriend of 3 years, well ex-girlfriend now broke up with me about a month ago, and my life has been in a complete mess ever since. It wasn't the kind of breakup you see coming, either. There were no big fights, no moments where I thought, yeah, this is falling apart. From my perspective, things were solid between us. Sure, we had the usual arguments here and there, but nothing that would make me think we were on the brink of breaking up. Then, one random evening, she sat me down and told me she needed to talk. Her tone was serious, but not angry, so I assumed maybe she wanted to discuss something minor like the usual relationship check-ins we'd have from time to time. Instead, she hit me with the whole "I need space to figure myself out" speech. I was blindsided. She said it wasn't about me, that I hadn't done anything wrong, but she felt stuck in her own life. She talked about how she didn't feel like she was growing as a person and needed time to figure out who she really was. I could tell it was hard for her to say all this, but that didn't make it hurt any less. I loved her, still do, honestly, and hearing her say she needed space made me feel like I wasn't enough for her. I asked her if there was someone else. I think that's a natural reaction, right? When you've been with someone for years and they suddenly decide they need space, your mind automatically jumps to the worst case scenario. She swore up and down that there was no one else, that this wasn't about another guy, but about her needing to focus on herself. I wanted to believe her. I didn't want to be that guy who accuses his partner of cheating or lying just because things aren't going his way. So, I let her go. It wasn't easy. I spent the first week of the breakup barely functioning. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't think about anything except how much I missed her. I kept replaying every moment of our relationship in my head, trying to figure out where things went wrong, what I could have done differently. Then, just when I was starting to accept that she needed space, I found out she had moved in with her male best friend, Jake. Jake has always been a sore spot in our relationship. They've been friends since high school, and they're really close, like, almost too close. I tried to play it cool for most of our relationship because I didn't want to come off as insecure or controlling. Whenever I brought it up, she'd get defensive, saying Jake was like a brother to her and that I had nothing to worry about. I wanted to believe her, so I pushed my doubts aside. But now, just a week after we broke up, she was moving into Jake's apartment. She told me it was temporary, that she needed somewhere to stay while she figured out her next steps. It felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream at her, ask her how she could do this to me, but I didn't. We weren't together anymore, so I had no right to tell her where she could or couldn't live. Here's where things get even more complicated. Jake has a roommate, Brandon. I'd met Brandon a few times when I visited Jake's place. He's the quiet, nerdy type, introverted, socially awkward, and not the kind of guy you'd ever think of as a threat. He barely spoke to me during those visits and always seemed harmless. Fast forward to last night. I got a call from Jake, and he sounded completely freaked out. He told me that Brandon had been acting really strange ever since my ex moved in. At first, it seemed innocent enough. Brandon was being overly nice to her, offering to cook meals, cleaning the apartment more often, buying her little gifts like snacks or coffee. My ex thought he was just being friendly, but Jake started noticing some seriously creepy behavior. Jake found a notebook in Brandon's room that was filled with detailed entries about my ex. I'm talking about stuff like what she wore on specific days, what she ate, how she laughed at certain jokes. There were even entries from years ago, back when she and Jake first became friends. It was clear Brandon had been obsessing over her for a long time. When Jake confronted Brandon about the notebook, things got heated. Brandon admitted that he'd been jealous of my relationship with her and that he was thrilled when she broke up with me. He said he always thought I was in the way and that this was his chance to finally win her over. But it doesn't stop there. Jake also caught Brandon sneaking into her room when she wasn't home. He wouldn't tell me exactly what Brandon was doing in there, but whatever it was enough to freak Jake out. He said Brandon had been acting more and more possessive, like he thought of her as his. Jake is worried about her safety, but here's the thing, I think Jake has feelings for her too. The way he talks about her, the way he's suddenly so protective, it all screams that he's been hiding his feelings for years. I can't prove it, but it feels like this whole situation is bringing out something he's been trying to suppress. I tried reaching out to her to warn her about Brandon, but she's been distant ever since the breakup. She's polite when we talk, but there's this coldness, like she doesn't want to give me false hope or make me think we might get back together. I get it, but it's frustrating because she has no idea what's happening behind her back. I told Jake to get her out of there immediately, but he's hesitant. He says he doesn't want to scare her or make her feel like he's overstepping. I think part of him doesn't want to risk ruining his friendship with her. Meanwhile, Brandon is still there, lurking, and every day she stays in that apartment feels like a ticking time bomb. I feel completely helpless. If I try to warn her directly, I risk looking like the bitter ex who's just trying to cause trouble. If I trust Jake to handle it, I don't know if he'll actually do what's best for her or what's best for himself. And if I do nothing, who knows what Brandon might do. This whole situation is like something out of a bad thriller, and I feel like I'm watching it all unfold from the sidelines, unable to do anything. What do I do, Reddit? Am I overreacting, or is this as insane as it feels? Any advice would mean the world to me right now. Update. Alright, I never thought I'd have to come back with an update, but here we are. Things have gotten way worse since my original post. After reading through some of the advice, I realized that sitting back and doing nothing wasn't an option anymore. Too many people pointed out that my ex could be in real danger, and I couldn't live with myself if something happened to her because I was too afraid to step in. I decided to call her directly. No more beating around the bush or worrying about how I'd come across. I just told her I needed to talk to her, and thankfully, she agreed to meet up. We met at a coffee shop, and I could tell right away that she was on edge. She looked tired, bags under her eyes, hair tied up in a messy bun, the kind of look that says you haven't been sleeping well. When we sat down, she immediately asked me what was so urgent. I tried to ease into the conversation, but I could see her patience running thin, so I just blurted it out. I told her that Jake had found Brandon's notebook and that Brandon had been sneaking into her room. At first, she looked at me like I was crazy. She said it didn't make sense, that Brandon was harmless, that Jake would have told her if something like that was happening. I didn't want to throw Jake under the bus, but I had no choice. I told her Jake didn't want to scare her, which is why he hadn't told her yet, but that I couldn't sit back knowing what I knew. She sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, just staring at her coffee. Finally, she looked up at me and said, "I don't know if I can believe you." That hurt more than I expected. I knew we weren't in a good place, but to hear her say she didn't trust me was like a punch to the gut. I told her to talk to Jake if she didn't believe me, and then I left. I couldn't sit there anymore, not with the way she was looking at me, like I was some kind of jealous ex trying to stir up drama. A few hours later, Jake called me. He said she had confronted him about what I told her, and he confirmed everything. He told her about the notebook, about Brandon sneaking into her room, and about the argument he had with Brandon. She broke down crying and said she had no idea any of this was happening. Jake told her she needed to leave the apartment immediately, but she insisted on staying the night to pack her things. I don't know why she didn't just leave right then and there. Maybe she thought she'd be safe since Jake was there, or maybe she didn't want to believe that Brandon was as dangerous as he seemed. Either way, she decided to stay, and that's when things really went off the rails. Another update. The next day, I got another call from Jake, and this one was even worse. Apparently, after my ex confronted Jake and Brandon about the situation, Brandon lost it. He started yelling, saying Jake was trying to turn her against him and that I was just bitter because she broke up with me. My ex tried to calm him down, but Brandon wasn't having it. He stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door behind him. Jake said my ex was visibly shaken but insisted she was fine. She said she'd finish packing her things and leave the next morning. Jake offered to stay home from work to keep an eye on things, but she told him it wasn't necessary. She said she didn't want to feel like she was being babysat and that she could handle herself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her being in that apartment, knowing Brandon was still out there somewhere. I tried to convince myself that everything would be fine, but I had this nagging feeling in my gut that something bad was going to happen. The next morning, I woke up to a frantic text from Jake. It said, "Call me now. It's about her." My heart sank. I called him immediately, and he told me that Brandon had come back to the apartment in the middle of the night. He was drunk and banging on the door, yelling for her to let him in. Jake said he woke up to the noise and immediately called the police. By the time the cops arrived, Brandon was gone. My ex was terrified, but, thankfully, she wasn't hurt. She packed her things and left that morning, and Jake told her she could stay with him until she figured out where to go next. She was hesitant at first, probably because of all the emotions tied up in their friendship, but she eventually agreed. As for Brandon, the police are now involved. Jake gave them the notebook as evidence, and my ex filed a restraining order against him. I don't know where Brandon is now, but I can only hope the police find him before he tries something else. Final update. It's been a few weeks since everything went down, and things are finally starting to calm down. My ex is staying with her sister now, and she's slowly trying to put her life back together. We've talked a few times since then, and while things are still a little awkward between us, I think she's starting to see that I wasn't just trying to cause drama. Jake, on the other hand, has been a mess. He's blaming himself for everything that happened, saying he should have noticed Brandon's behavior sooner and done something about it. I told him it wasn't his fault, but I don't think he believes me. He's been distant lately, and I can't help but wonder if his feelings for my ex are part of the reason he's so torn up about all of this. As for me, I'm still trying to process everything. A part of me hoped that this situation would bring my ex and me closer together, but I've come to realize that's not going to happen. She's made it clear that she needs time to heal and figure out what she wants, and I have to respect that. Brandon hasn't been seen since that night, but the police are actively looking for him. It scares me to think about what could have happened if Jake hadn't been there or if I hadn't spoken up when I did. This whole situation has been a nightmare, but at least she's safe now, and that's all that matters. One thing that still haunts me, though, is how easily things could have gone unnoticed. It's terrifying to think about how many other people might be dealing with similar situations without even realizing it. My ex told me that she never suspected a thing about Brandon, and it made me wonder how often people mask their true intentions behind a facade of friendliness. It's a harsh reminder that we sometimes need to trust our instincts, even if it makes us seem paranoid. I've realized that it's always better to be safe than sorry when it comes to the people we let into our lives. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that sometimes you have to put your pride aside and do what's right, even if it means risking your reputation or your relationships. I don't know what the future holds for any of us, but I'm just glad this chapter is finally coming to a close. Thank you to everyone who gave me advice and support through all of this. I don't know if I would have had the courage to step up if it weren't for your comments.